When we look at the climate state of the world, there is much reason to be apprehensive. Experts have outlined that we need to increase renewable energy at least ninefold to meet the goals of the 2015 Paris Agreement and avoid the worst climate change impact. But every country you turn, it does not seem like they are extremely interested in changing our climate story for the better. There have been great efforts by concerned organizations to not only bring awareness to the problem at hand, but also propose changes to halt the climate decline. Most of these changes, however, are radical and will take some time, patience, and a lot of convincing governments to effect. For example, some European countries are still generating energy through coal, a deadly material for the climate. But one of the ways proposed to get us back in the driving seat of the climate change challenge is by reducing the dangerous carbon toxins emitted from our vehicles. This is an important part of the climate struggle because it is amongst the few things regular citizens can have a hand in. The climate projection goals that we are striving for is an 80% reduction in greenhouse gas emission from 1990 levels by 2050. About 60% of carbon pollution from the transportation sector comes from passenger vehicles. The argument is that if we somehow replace them with renewably generated zero-carbon electricity by 2050, we would have addressed a huge part of the climate change challenge for transportation. But is this true? Can electric cars save our extremely polluted cities? Keep on watching the video to find out. So, what are the advantages of electric cars? The major benefit of electric cars is the contribution that they can make towards improving air quality in towns and cities. With no exhaust pipe, pure electric cars produce zero carbon dioxide emissions when driving. This dramatically reduces air pollution. Car makers themselves have acknowledged that it is not possible to eliminate harmful emissions from the engines of fossil fuel vehicles, which makes the only logical option, if we are serious about climate change, be to switch from engines to electric motors. Put simply, electric cars automatically give us cleaner streets, making our towns and cities a better place to be for pedestrians and cyclists. In over a year, one electric car on the roads can save an average of 1.5 million grams of CO2. That is the equivalent of 4 return flights from London to Barcelona. The clearest advantage that electric cars have is their lack of pollution. But there are naysayers, and their reasoning seems logical. Electric cars will obviously gain the upper hand over the years, and rightfully so. Their engines don't churn out polluting fumes, making them the obvious choice for improving air quality in towns and cities. However, electric cars are only as green as the electricity they run on. This is because most of the electricity globally is still produced by burning fossil fuels, meaning that charging an electric car can indirectly generate similar amounts of greenhouse gases to a petrol-powered vehicle, especially in countries that still rely heavily on coal power. The logic is right. With the advent of electrification of vehicles, the pollution shifts to source. If the source is solar, wind, and any other renewables, it will benefit. But this is not the case in most instances. Electric vehicles simply move the fossil fuel combustion from inside the car to another part of the country. They don't do much about how to stop nations from emitting greenhouse gases. This heavy use of fossil fuels means the electric car is not as eco-friendly as it might initially appear. For example, higher electrification of vehicles may lead to oil demand peaking by 2030, and any reduction in emissions from the likes of electric vehicles will be offset by the increased use of power plants to charge them, according to the International Energy Agency's annual World Energy Outlook, which plots different scenarios of future energy use. It still rounds us back to the need for governmental involvement through strong pro-green policies. And if we shift our focus from the energy needed to operate an electric car to the energy needed to make one, the argument sounds even more credible, because making electric cars requires a lot of energy. The emissions created during the production of an electric car tend to be higher than that generated to make a conventional car. This is due to the manufacture of lithium-ion batteries, which are an essential part of an electric car. More than a third of the lifetime CO2 emissions from an electric car come from the energy used to make the car itself. The relief is that as technology advances, this would improve. But for the foreseeable future, this is another dent in the pro-electric car argument. However, there are strong counter-arguments to these points. First, the argument against the energy electric car's charging source utilized. While producing the electricity to power electric vehicles can generate toxic emissions, those emissions levels are far lower than the pollution emitted by conventional vehicles, and could be even lower as the electric power sector cleans up over the next few decades. Even after taking battery manufacture into account, electric cars are still a greener option. This is because of the reduction in emissions created over the car's lifetime. Researchers have stated that the average lifetime emissions from electric cars are up to 70% lower than petrol cars in countries like Sweden and France, where most electricity comes from renewables and nuclear, and around 30% lower in the UK. The study projects that in 2050, every second car on the streets of the world would be electric, and this would reduce global CO2 emissions by up to 1.5 gigatons per year, which is equivalent to the total current CO2 emissions of Russia. There's a middle ground to the whole argument, which comes in the shape of plug-in hybrids, PHEV. These are vehicles that use conventional petrol, but can also be powered by electricity. A recent Greenpeace and Transport and Environment report has termed plug-in hybrids as wolves in sheep's clothing. Plug-in hybrids combine an electric motor with a traditional fuel engine and produce some emissions during a drive. While manufacturers of PHEV officially claim that their vehicles' CO2 emissions average 44 grams per kilometer, they actually emit around 117 grams per kilometer in real use, which brings them closer to the value for petrol and diesel cars of 164 to 167 grams per kilometer. But the true emissions of a hybrid depend on how you drive it. If you don't plug it in, a hybrid behaves like a conventional hybrid, and if you drive it fast, the fossil fuel engine will fire up anyway, negating the emissions benefits of battery power. Lots of people purchase the PHEV for the reduced tax, but after purchasing the vehicle, they do not drive it in a way that produces the desired ecological advantage of owning an electric car. This way, the manufacturers and owners only perform the adoption of green behavior. The green credentials of a hybrid depend on how much of the journey is driven on electric miles, as well as the way in which the vehicle is charged. This is why it's important for hybrid drivers to consider how their electricity is generated, whether through renewable energy or non-renewable energy. While there are great arguments for and against electric cars and hybrid cars, it is obvious that eco-friendliness is about much more than just what comes out of the exhaust pipe. There is a great need to find a sustainable source of clean supply of renewable energy. According to researchers, electrification is necessary but not enough. The abrasion of electric tires and brakes will still create pollution in cities. The researchers propose travel demand reductions by at least 20%, along with a radical shift away from cars as a means of transportation if we are to meet our climate change goals. A switch to electric cars is a climate emergency, not a climate inconvenience. Electric cars will not halt the decline of air quality in our extremely polluted cities. They will only slow it down. There is far more work to be done. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribing to our channel. Let us know your thoughts on electric cars in the comment section below.